Below average. That's what he called me. Standing there in front of 12 of my coworkers, holding my performance review like it was contaminated garbage. Lawrence didn't even have the decency to lower his voice. Jenna consistently ranks in the bottom tier of our sales team. Her numbers speak for themselves. The conference room went dead silent. I watched Sarah shift uncomfortably in her chair. Tom stared at his laptop screen like his life depended on it. Nobody looked at me. Nobody said a word. And I just sat there, 28 years old, feeling like I was shrinking into nothing. My name is Jenna Walsh, and I'm 28. For 3 years, I believed I was failing at everything. Before I go further, please like this video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I would love to hear from you, and I want you to see how this ends. That meeting was on a Tuesday in March. I remember, because I went home that night and called my mom, crying so hard I could barely speak. Maybe I'm just not cut out for sales, I told her, my voice breaking. Maybe Lawrence is right. Maybe I really am below average. She tried to comfort me, but what could she say? The numbers don't lie, right? That's what Lawrence always said. The numbers don't lie. Except they do. They lie when someone is stealing them. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this all started. Because the betrayal didn't begin that Tuesday. It had been building for 3 years, one stolen commission at a time. I started at Pinnacle Solutions, fresh out of college, hungry and determined. It was my first real job, and I threw myself into it completely. 60-hour weeks were normal. I studied our products until I could recite specifications in my sleep. I made cold calls until my voice was hoarse. I genuinely believed that if I worked hard enough, if I was good enough, success would follow. Lawrence was my manager from day one. Tall, confident, with this way of speaking that made you feel like he was doing you a favor just by acknowledging your existence. In the beginning, I admired him. When he'd pull me aside for coaching sessions, I hung on every word. When he criticized my approach, I thanked him and promised to do better. When he started tracking my leads more closely than anyone else's, I thought he was invested in my success. "You show promise, Jenna," he'd say, "but you need to trust the process. Let me help you close these bigger deals. You're not quite ready for the complex accounts yet." I was so naive, so grateful for his attention, so desperate to prove myself that I handed over my best prospects without question. The pharmaceutical account that took me 4 months to develop? Lawrence said he'd partner with me on the final presentation. The manufacturing company that specifically requested to work with me after a trade show? He convinced me I needed his experience to seal the deal properly. Every time, the commission structure got murky. "We'll split this one since I did the closing presentation. This needs to be under my name because of the account size. But don't worry, I'll make sure you get credit. The client signed with the company, not with you specifically, so it goes to the senior representative." I believed him. God, I actually believed him. The first performance review was devastating but not surprising. I'd helped develop major accounts, but somehow my individual numbers looked pathetic on paper. Lawrence sat across from me, his expression a perfect mix of disappointment and fake concern. "I have to be honest, Jenna. Your performance has been below expectations, your closing rate is concerning, and your revenue numbers are frankly unacceptable for someone who's been here a full year." I stared at the review document, seeing my name at the bottom of the ranking list. But what about the Meridian account and coastal industries? I worked on those for working on an account, and closing an account are two different things, he said, leaning back in his chair. Anyone can make calls and send emails. What matters is who actually brings in the revenue. The client relationships, the strategic thinking, the final negotiations. That's where real sales skills show. I left that meeting feeling hollow, broken, like maybe I'd been lying to myself about having any talent at all. But I didn't quit. I doubled down. I started working even longer hours, being even more aggressive with prospecting, researching accounts so thoroughly that I knew more about their businesses than they did. And the pattern continued. I'd develop relationships, nurture leads, build trust with prospects. Then Lawrence would step in at the crucial moment. "Let me take this one across the finish line, Jenna. It's a complex deal, And we can't afford to lose it. Year 2 was worse than the first. My performance review was a nightmare. Lawrence didn't just rank me last, he made sure everyone knew it. He started holding team meetings where he'd go through everyone's numbers: Sarah's revenue, Tom's closing rate, Mike's client retention. And then, with this theatrical pause, he'd get to mine. And Jenna, well, Jenna is still struggling to find her footing. Some people are natural salespeople, and others need more time to develop. We're committed to helping everyone reach their potential. But effort alone isn't enough in this business. The humiliation was crushing. My coworkers started treating me differently. Not mean, exactly, but like I was fragile. Like I might break if they talked about their successes too enthusiastically around me. During team celebrations, I felt like a charity case. When new hires started, I could see the pity in their eyes when someone quietly explained that I was still learning the ropes. The worst part was how it affected every aspect of my life. I stopped dating because how do you explain to someone that you're failing at your career? I stopped going out with friends because I couldn't afford to keep up, and because their questions about work felt like daggers. I developed insomnia, lying awake at 3 in the morning, wondering what was wrong with me, why I couldn't seem to do the one thing I'd built my entire adult life around. My apartment was a studio in the worst part of town, because that's all I could afford on my base salary, with almost no commission. I ate ramen for dinner most nights. I wore the same 3 professional outfits on rotation, praying nobody would notice. I was drowning financially and emotionally, but I couldn't bring myself to quit. Quitting felt like admitting that Lawrence was right about me. By year 3, something had shifted in Lawrence's approach. He wasn't even pretending to mentor me anymore. The mask had started to slip, and what I saw underneath was ugly. "Jenna, I need you to set up a meeting with Davidson Corp," he'd say, not even looking up from his computer. "Get me 30 minutes with their CFO. "I've been working that relationship for 2 months," I'd reply. "I think I'm close to getting them to consider our premium package. Just set up the meeting. I'll handle the actual selling." It wasn't a request. It was never a request anymore. I watched him take credit for my work so brazenly that I started to wonder if I was losing my mind. Did I actually develop the relationship with Nexus Manufacturing? Or was I imagining it? Did I really spend 6 weeks researching Continental Services' pain points and crafting a custom solution? Or was that just wishful thinking? Gaslighting is a word people throw around casually, but when you're living it, it's suffocating. Lawrence had made me doubt my own memory, my own worth, my own reality. Every small success I thought I'd earned was reframed as his achievement. Every failure was definitely, completely mine. The third performance review was the breaking point I told you about, below average, in front of the entire team. But what you didn't see was what happened after that meeting ended, and everyone filed out. Lawrence asked me to stay behind. "Jenna," he said, his voice taking on that fake concern tone I'd learned to hate. "I think we need to have a serious conversation about your future here." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" 3 years is a long time to not show meaningful improvement. I've been protecting you, advocating for you with upper management, but there's only so much I can do. The board is asking questions about why we're keeping underperformers on the team. Underperformers? The word came out as a whisper. "Look, you're a nice person. You work hard. But this is sales, not a charity. We need people who can actually close deals and bring in revenue. I'm going to have to start documenting your deficiencies more formally. Create a paper trail. You understand?" I nodded, because what else could I do? But something inside me was screaming. 3 years of working myself to exhaustion. 3 years of handing over my best prospects. 3 years of watching him get promoted while I barely scraped by. And now he was threatening my job. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I broke into the office system. I know how that sounds. I know it was wrong. But desperation makes you do things you never thought you were capable of. I used Lawrence's login information. I'd watched him type his password dozens of times during our coaching sessions, and I started digging through files I'd never had access to before. What I found made me sick to my stomach. Client after client that I developed, nurtured, and handed over to Lawrence was listed under his name exclusively. Not just the final closing credit, but the entire relationship history. Emails I'd sent were forwarded under his name. Call logs showed him as the primary contact. Meeting notes I'd written were saved in his client folders with his signature at the bottom. Meridian Industries, $340,000 in revenue. Primary sales representative. Lawrence, Coastal Industries, $180,000 in revenue. Primary sales representative. Lawrence, Davidson Corporation, $290,000 in revenue. Primary sales representative. Lawrence, Nexus Manufacturing, $450,000 in revenue. Primary sales representative. Lawrence. The list went on and on. Deal after deal that I had originated, developed, and delivered to him for closing support. According to the official records, I barely existed. 3 years of my work, my relationships, my late nights and weekend calls, all erased. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was discovering that he'd been doing this to other people too. There was a folder labeled Transition Accounts, filled with client files from former employees. People who'd been fired for poor performance or who'd quit in frustration. I recognized some of the names. Talented reps who'd mysteriously started struggling and then disappeared from the company. Their best accounts had all been transferred to Lawrence immediately after their departures. I found performance review templates where he'd copied and pasted the same criticisms for different employees. I found emails to HR documenting concerns about people's abilities, always sent right after they'd started developing promising leads. I found a systematic pattern of theft that had been going on for years. And then I found something that changed everything. A spreadsheet hidden in a subfolder, password protected, that took me an hour to crack. It was Lawrence's real commission tracking, not the company's official records, but his personal calculation of how much money he'd made by stealing other people's work. My name was at the top of the list. Over 3 years, Lawrence had taken credit for $2.4 million in revenue that I had generated. $2.4 million. The commission on that alone would have been enough to change my entire life. I sat in that dark office at 11 o'clock at night, staring at the screen, feeling something I'd never felt before. It wasn't anger exactly. It was colder than anger, more focused. It was the feeling of someone who'd finally seen the truth and was ready to do something about it. I didn't just find evidence, I found a weapon. And I was going to use it. I spent the next 2 weeks planning. Not plotting planning. There's a difference. Plotting is emotional, messy, prone to mistakes. Planning is systematic, cold, strategic. Everything Lawrence had taught me about sales, I was about to use against him. First, I needed copies of everything. Not just screenshots that could be dismissed as fake, but official records with timestamps and metadata intact. I worked late every night that week, systematically downloading files, cross-referencing client communications, building an ironclad case, every email where I'd introduced myself to a prospect, every call log showing my number, every meeting invite I'd sent, every contract I'd drafted. The beautiful thing about digital records is that they never really disappear. Even when Lawrence had reassigned accounts to himself, the original client intake forms still had my name. The initial contact reports still showed my research. The IP addresses on prospect communications still traced back to my computer. But evidence wasn't enough. I needed the right audience. The company's organizational structure was key to everything. Lawrence reported to Regional Director Jennifer Park, who reported to Vice President of Sales David Chen, who reported to the Board of Directors. The board met monthly to review departmental performance, and their next meeting was scheduled for the first Thursday of the month. I knew this because I'd been the one preparing Lawrence's reports for those meetings for the past year. Another learning opportunity he'd given me. "It'll help you understand the bigger picture," he'd said. What it actually did was give me access to executive communications and board meeting schedules. During this time, Lawrence was getting bolder. Maybe he sensed I was beaten down enough that I wouldn't fight back anymore. Maybe he thought 3 years of systematic abuse had broken my spirit completely. He started taking credit for my work in real time, not even waiting for deals to close. "Great job on the Morrison Industries presentation yesterday," Jennifer said to me after a team meeting. "I heard it went really well." "Thanks," I started to say, but Lawrence cut me off. "The presentation was solid, but we're still working on Jenna's closing techniques. I'm going to take the lead on the follow-up to make sure we don't lose momentum." Jennifer nodded approvingly. "Good thinking. It's a significant potential account." I wanted to scream. Morrison Industries had called me directly after seeing my work at a trade show. I'd spent weeks understanding their needs, crafting a custom solution, researching their competition. The presentation wasn't just solid, it was brilliant. And now Lawrence was positioning himself to swoop in for the signature and the commission. But instead of screaming, I smiled. "That sounds perfect. I'll send you all my notes and research," because I had a better plan. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. on Thursday. Lawrence would be presenting departmental performance rankings, including his annual recommendation for team restructuring. I'd helped him prepare slides showing everyone's numbers, with mine predictably at the bottom and his at the top. What Lawrence didn't know was that I'd also prepared my own presentation. Wednesday night, I stayed late again. This time, not to steal information, but to deliver it. I printed out everything: client files, email chains, revenue reports, Lawrence's hidden spreadsheets. 3 years of evidence, organized chronologically, with clear annotations showing the pattern of theft. I made 7 copies, one for each board member, plus extras. Then I wrote a letter. Not an emotional rant, but a professional summary of my findings. I'd learned to write like Lawrence over the years. Corporate and precise. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Dear board members," it began, "I am writing to provide you with documented evidence of systematic revenue, misattribution, and employee exploitation within our sales department. The attached materials demonstrate a pattern of fraudulent reporting that has resulted in the misallocation of over $4.2 million in commission payments over the past 5 years. $4.2 million. That was the total I'd calculated for all the employees Lawrence had victimized, not just me. I'd cross-referenced the transition accounts folder with HR records of departed employees, reconstructing the theft that had been happening long before I arrived. I didn't send the letter electronically. Email can be intercepted, deleted, or ignored. Instead, I hand-delivered sealed envelopes to each board member's office at 7 a.m. Thursday morning. Their assistants confirmed receipt. There was no taking it back. Then I went to work like nothing had happened. The board meeting was scheduled to start at 10. Lawrence spent the morning reviewing his presentation, completely oblivious to what was coming. He even asked me to grab him a coffee. "Make it strong," he said without looking up from his laptop. "Big presentation today. Going to talk about restructuring the team for better performance." I knew exactly what that meant. He was going to recommend firing me. Probably Sarah, too, since her numbers had been declining after he'd started taking her leads as well. Clear out the underperformers to make room for fresh victims. "Sure thing," I said, and brought him the coffee with a smile. At 9:45, Lawrence headed upstairs to the executive conference room with his laptop bag and his smug confidence. I waited exactly 10 minutes, then followed. The executive floor was different from our sales floor. Quieter, more expensive furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows that made everything feel important. I'd only been up there a handful of times, always trailing behind Lawrence for meetings where I was introduced as one of our developing reps. I walked past the conference room and saw through the glass walls that Lawrence had already started his presentation. He was standing at the head of the table, his slides projected on the big screen, looking completely in control. The board members were seated around the polished table, my envelope stacked in front of each of them, still sealed. I found an empty office across the hall where I could see into the conference room without being seen, and I waited. For the first 20 minutes, everything went according to Lawrence's plan. I watched him gesture confidently at his slides, saw the board members nodding along as he presented his version of our team's performance. He showed the revenue rankings with his name at the top and mine at the bottom. He talked about the need to optimize team composition and focus resources on high performers. Jennifer Park was taking notes. David Chen was asking questions about retention strategies. Everything was proceeding exactly as Lawrence expected. Then board chair Patricia Williams opened her envelope. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but I could see her expression change as she read my letter. She flipped through the attached documents, her eyebrows rising. She leaned over to whisper something to the member next to her, who immediately opened his own envelope. Lawrence kept presenting, completely unaware that the ground was shifting beneath him. He was in the middle of explaining his mentorship approach with struggling team members when Patricia held up her hand. I watched Lawrence pause mid-sentence, his confident expression flickering slightly. Patricia said something and gestured to the documents in front of her. Lawrence nodded, probably thinking she had a question about one of his slides. Then she said something else, and Lawrence's face went white. The other board members had opened their envelopes now. I could see them comparing documents, cross-referencing my evidence with Lawrence's presentation. Someone asked him a direct question. I could tell by the way they were all looking at him expectantly. Lawrence's mouth moved, but I could see the confidence draining from his posture. His shoulders tensed, his hands gestured more frantically. This wasn't going the way he'd planned. Patricia stood up and walked to the door of the conference room. For a moment, I thought she might be ending the meeting, but instead, she opened the door and looked down the hallway directly at me. "Ms. Walsh," she called out, and her voice carried clearly in the quiet hallway. "Could you please join us?" My heart hammered against my ribs as I walked into that conference room. 7 board members sitting around the table, stacks of evidence in front of each of them, and Lawrence standing frozen at the head of the table like a deer in headlights. "Please have a seat," Patricia said, gesturing to an empty chair. I sat down directly across from Lawrence. For the first time in 3 years, I had the higher ground. "Ms. Walsh," Patricia continued, "we've just been reviewing some very interesting documentation. Before we proceed, we'd like to verify some details with you. Are you familiar with the Meridian Industries account?" "Yes," I said, keeping my voice steady. I developed that relationship starting in February of last year. Initial contact through a trade show, followed by 6 weeks of needs, assessment, and solution development. And who was the primary point of contact for that client? I was. I have all the original emails and call logs if you need to see them. Patricia nodded and made a note. "According to our official records, that account is credited to Mr. Lawrence. Can you explain that discrepancy?" I looked directly at Lawrence. He was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, not disappointment, but something closer to panic. Lawrence asked me to let him handle the final presentation to ensure we closed the deal successfully. He said it would be better for the company if someone with more experience took the lead on such an important account. I see. And the commission structure for that arrangement? I was told I would receive appropriate recognition for my contribution, but the official commission went to Lawrence as the closing rep. One of the other board members leaned forward. "Ms. Walsh, according to the documentation you've provided, this pattern occurred with multiple accounts over a 3-year period. Is that correct?" "Yes, sir. Can you estimate the total revenue involved?" I had the number memorized. For my account specifically, approximately $2.4 million. But based on the files I found, the pattern extends to other former employees as well. The total is closer to $4.2 million over 5 years. The room went completely silent. Lawrence was gripping the back of his chair so tightly his knuckles were white. Patricia looked at him. "Mr. Lawrence, these are serious allegations. Would you like to respond?" Lawrence opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. When he finally spoke, his voice came out hoarse. There's been a misunderstanding. Jenna is a junior rep. She needed guidance on complex accounts. I was mentoring her, helping her develop professionally. The commission structure reflects the reality of who actually closed these deals." "I see," Patricia said. "And can you explain why Ms. Walsh's contributions were completely omitted from the official client records?" Why her initial contact reports, research, and meeting notes were reassigned under your name? Lawrence's face was sweating now. That's that's standard practice for account management. When a senior rep takes over an account, we consolidate the records for clarity. Mr. Lawrence, another board member interjected, we've also been reviewing your personnel files. Over the past 5 years, 7 sales representatives have left the company citing performance concerns. In each case, their most promising accounts were immediately reassigned to you. Would you characterize this as coincidence? People leave for various reasons, Lawrence said, but his voice was shaking now. Underperforming reps often blame external factors rather than accepting responsibility for their results. Underperforming? Patricia repeated slowly. She looked down at the documents in front of her. Ms. Walsh, according to these records, your actual revenue generation would rank you where on our sales team? I'd calculated this number so many times it was burned into my brain. First, by a significant margin. And your current official ranking? Last. The silence that followed was devastating. 7 of the most powerful people in the company staring at the man who had built his career on lies. Lawrence looked like he was going to be sick. Mr. Lawrence, Patricia said finally, I think we need to take a break from this presentation. Please return to your office and make yourself available for further questioning. Ms. Walsh, please remain here. We have more questions for you. Lawrence gathered his laptop with hands that were visibly shaking. As he walked toward the door, he had to pass right behind my chair. For just a moment, he paused. You have no idea what you've just done, he whispered. So quietly, only I could hear. I turned to look at him directly. Yes, I do, I whispered back. I just told the truth. The investigation took 6 weeks. 6 weeks of interviews, document reviews, client calls, and forensic analysis of the sales database. 6 weeks of Lawrence being suspended, pending findings. 6 weeks of other employees coming forward with their own experiences. The final report was damning. Not just the revenue theft, but systematic harassment, document falsification, and what they termed a pattern of predatory management designed to exploit junior employees. Lawrence was terminated immediately. His commission payments for the past 3 years were clawed back, and the company began the process of pursuing legal action. But the most beautiful moment came 3 weeks into the investigation. I was called into Patricia Williams's office, not the conference room this time, but her personal office with family photos on the desk and afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. Jenna, she said, we've completed our preliminary review of account ownership and revenue attribution. We'll be issuing you a check for back commissions in amount of $180,000. We're also promoting you to senior sales representative with an immediate salary increase. $180,000. The money Lawrence had stolen from me, plus penalties and interest. Enough to pay off my student loans, move to a real apartment, buy clothes that weren't falling apart. Enough to rebuild the life he'd systematically destroyed. But even better than the money was what happened next. Patricia stood up and walked to her window, looking down at the parking lot. You know, she said, we're going to need a new sales manager for your division. Someone who understands what it means to develop genuine client relationships. Someone who knows the difference between mentorship and exploitation. She turned back to look at me. Would you be interested in discussing that opportunity? 6 months later, I was sitting in Lawrence's old office, completely redecorated, of course, reviewing performance reports for my team. Real performance reports based on actual contributions and honest evaluation. My first decision as manager had been to implement a transparent commission tracking system where every team member could see exactly how revenue was attributed and why. My second decision was to establish a mentorship program that actually developed people instead of exploiting them. The best revenge isn't getting even. It's becoming everything the person who hurt you never could be. So please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and tell me about a time when the truth finally came out in your own life. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe. I share more stories like this every week. And trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next.